Welcome. I am so excited that you are joining us for this breakout session, and I have the auspicious honor of introducing our speakers. So this conversation came together out of a recognition of incredibly important work being led by Orthodox Jewish women to advance safety and equity in our community, and a desire to create space for us all to gather to both learn more deeply about the issues, but just as importantly, to explore how we can each be more effective in supporting Orthodox leaders in their change work. We are really excited to see where some synergies can be fostered through this conversation. And I want to first introduce our Senior Advisor of SRE Network, Dr. Gila Ben-Shimol. So Gila has been a very close and trusted advisor to SRE and thought partner to me as well, and we've been putting a lot of thought into this conversation, so thank you so much for being here and moderating. I would also like to introduce Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, co-founder and president of Maharat. Maharat is the first institution to ordain Orthodox women as clergy. She also serves as the rabbinic staff at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. Rabbi Sarah also is a member of our SRE Strategic Planning Committee, and we are so appreciative of her contributions there. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, I would love to introduce Keshet Star, CEO of the Organization for the Resolution of Agunot-ORA. Round of applause. ORA is the nonprofit dedicated to globally eliminating abuse from the Jewish divorce process. Keshet also has authored academic work focused on get refusal and domestic abuse, and is a fellow alumna of cohort 2 of the Wexner Field Fellowship with myself, and was named one of the Jewish Week's 36 under 36. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ilana, and thank you all for choosing to come to this breakout session. I hope you get to meet wonderful new experts and also learn from them. I want to name, because Rachel this morning spoke about identities and how important it is to the work that we do, that I too am Orthodox and I'm part of the Orthodox community. And one of the things I said to Ilana when she came on to SRE was, it's very nice to be doing all this work in other communities, but I also want to make sure that this translates to the communities that I am a part of. And so these two are my teachers and heroines. I watch them and the work that they are doing, and I'm really proud that SRE is featuring Orthodox women leaders in doing the work of safety, respect, and equity. So thank you both for being here. So the conversation we're going to have today, I just want to also say, and we talked about this intentionally, is both to learn about the efforts of safety, respect, and equity in the Orthodox community, and how those in and outside of the Orthodox community can show up to support the Orthodox community in doing this work, even if it looks a little bit different than what you're used to it looking like, or if it has a different name and has a different kind of language, which is something that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to you by sort of situating the first general question, and then we'll break it down a bit. So we want to talk about the specific challenges, the similarities and the differences, because you each do very different kind of work to advance safety, respect, and equity. I don't even know if that's the term that you would use to qualify what you do, but how do you do that work in the different Orthodox spaces that you do? What are the challenges and what are the benefits? So Rabbi Sarah.
Thank you. First of all, I know that I would not be up here without you, Gila, and without the work that you have done behind the scenes and through your research in making sure that Orthodox voices are part of the conversation. And so thank you very much. It's very meaningful to sit up here with you.
Thank you.
And I love Keshet.
We're having a love fest. I hope that's okay.
I also just want to say that I'm going to answer your question, of course, but I am aware of the responsibility of speaking on behalf of a community that is very broad and is in no way monolithic. I am very proud of the Orthodox label that I wear. And I also am looking at you and see many people who could be up here as well. And so I hope we have a conversation as well as me speaking to this audience. So I think that when I started Maharat 15 years ago, it was certainly new, maybe revolutionary, maybe evolutionary, depending on language, and that is to your point, that I felt like it was a natural trajectory, and it was time for Orthodox women to be their fullest leaders. And to be ordained and to be contributors and at the communal table. And it felt like I was trying to broaden out the walls of the Orthodox spaces while also still serving the general Jewish community. And so I was surprised as I'm in my bubble of trying to climb and push and, jump through lakes and climb over walls, and sort of in this battle to discover that the community writ large was not that much further along than I was. In other words, what a profound sort of like realization that I found myself in one of the early SRE conferences at a table talking about salary transparency. I see Sarah here. And I was like, wait a minute. This is what I'm thinking about. I'm trying to set salary standards for my students and my graduates as they go out into the community and to make sure that there's transparency, and this is new for them, but surely we're building on what already exists, to only discover that the world writ large, the Jewish community certainly, is still struggling with many of the same things that we are. And so, the struggles are the struggles that we're all here for. They include trying to make sure that Orthodox women can be senior level professionals, can be seen as leaders, certainly salaries and transparency, and making sure that women are seen as authorities and powerful. And I think that just one more thought here is I would also say that there's a lot of siloing in the Orthodox community, which I think might also be very similar to what I see outside the Orthodox community, in that we're all heads down working on our own issue. And if we were able just to look up a little bit and see that we're have the same goals in mind, and that feminist leadership is so much about collaboration, that there's opportunities to think together and more broadly, both with others within the Orthodox community and of course across denominations. And so I would say there's more similarities than differences. I would say there are differences as well, and Gila mentioned some of the language differences, and I think Keshet had some other further thoughts about differences.
Absolutely.
You're on.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. First of all, what a joy to just be in this room and up on this panel with people who are doing such extraordinary work in all different corners of our community. So I'm really grateful to be here. And when I think about sort of some of those challenges for me, the work that I do is really around divorce equity, although I wouldn't use that term everywhere, which is partly what I'll be talking about. And in many ways, my work really comes at the crossroads of human rights and tradition. That you have people who are stuck in religious marriages that they want out of, and you have also a framework of how marriage and divorce has been done in Jewish communities for thousands of years in a way that we don't take lightly, and that I don't take lightly as someone who chose to be Orthodox, is proudly Orthodox, and loves our tradition. And so my work is really all about that tension. How do we protect people's rights? How do we give people what they need? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't feel like we're taking tradition and throwing it out the window? And part of how I try to do that, imperfectly for sure, is to really try to put language aside and focus more on content. That what I find is that we're so used to certain types of language in the nonprofit space and in progressive spaces that in certain parts of the Orthodox community, if you were to use the same terms, everyone would look at you like you have three heads and either wouldn't understand what you mean or possibly misunderstand it. And so what I've learned is that instead of getting stuck on terms or language, to think more about what those terms mean. So I'll share as an example, I think if you were to poll young women in my particular community, which is a little more on the right-wing end of modern Orthodoxy, and you were to ask them if they consider themselves a feminist, my guess is that the majority would say no. But if you were to ask them, do you think that a woman doing the same job as a man should get the same salary? They would say, of course, like, why wouldn't they? And so that's, I think, just one small example of where language can sometimes lead us astray, where if we get behind the language and focus on the content, we can find those common threads. And so a big part of what I do, especially in going into different segments of the community, is to try and take the same content. I care very much about being authentic to my values and my organization's values, but to repackage that content in language that meets the culture and the values of the community I'm going to. So I'm not doing a pitch on culture change to a community that hasn't changed their clothing styles for several hundred years on purpose. That's not what's going to speak to them. That's not a value. So trying to couch what you're trying to do and find the common threads as opposed to sticking to the same set of terms over and over, where you can just be losing a lot of people without realizing it.
I love both of your responses, and I'm going to quote Marty Linsky for a second time today. Rachel quoted him this morning, which is he talks about adaptive leadership and needing to move people at a rate that they can tolerate. And for the Orthodox community, a big piece of that is through language, right? And so if your goal is being met, it doesn't necessarily change if you're using a particular language. And in fact, I think everybody here would agree, you need to respect the language and terminology of the community with which you're working. And some people in this room, and the two of us, were at a conference earlier this year, and it was about women's leadership. But it was about gender and leadership in Orthodoxy, but it was really about women's equity. But that wasn't a term that the community was using, and so we did not use that term. And so I appreciate how you think about the work and also know how to practically apply it to move a community for the benefit of the wider world. So thank you for that lesson. So you touched a little bit upon some of the challenges. I'm curious if you could talk about the communal and or individual personal benefits to doing the respective kinds of work that you each do.
Sure. So I would say on a very personal level, the issue that I work on can impact both men and women, but disproportionately impacts women. And as a mom of 3 girls and 1 boy, I really feel like the work that we're doing is going to give my girls a safer community to enter into when they get to that stage where they're starting relationships. So there's a huge personal benefit to that. But I think there is a power to making your own backyard, in a way, a more beautiful place. That this is an imperfect community, certainly, but it's a community that I really love, that I've always loved since I first encountered it, and being able to create change coming from a place of also loving and respecting and being a member of the community. I think it comes off very differently, and it's incredibly rewarding. And it's not easy, because there's a lot of personal professional overlap in a role like mine, and I'm sure for many of my colleagues here, but there's nothing like making your corner of the world a better place, and that I feel that it's ultimately an expression of sort of core Jewish values, that when someone uses the Jewish divorce as a tool to extort money out of their former partner, that's a perversion of Jewish values, a manipulation of Jewish values. And when communities are trained on how to stand against that, it allows the essence of Jewish values and what Judaism is about to really come forward and be at the forefront.
Thank you. I just want to since we're amongst friends, just admit that I actually didn't even understand this question, because when I see individual and communal differences, I kind of say, huh? Is there a difference? And what I mean by that is, I think my trajectory has always been about trying to carve out a space where I belong as an individual, but also believe that all women belong. And so the individual and communal benefit for me has always been one and the same, for better or for worse. We can talk later about boundaries and how I work, on Shabbat in a shul and during the week at Maharat, and my friends are my community friends. So let's just talk about that at another time. Maybe there's somebody on the third floor to discuss that with. But anyway, the point is that when I started down this journey, and I didn't know that it was going to lead to where it is today, and I didn't know that I was even pursuing the rabbinate. There was no model for it. So I didn't wake up and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a rabbi one day. I just knew that I loved to learn, and I wanted to bring that Torah and that experience of community building to others. And when I started learning with Rabbi Weiss, who is my mentor, and the person who really had the courage to help set me on this path, I said right then and there, I don't want to do this alone. And I actually tried to, while I was learning towards smicha, I tried to create an institution around myself. I applied to get funding from an organization, and they were like, no, this isn't a real thing yet. I called it Orthodox Women Learning Project, believe it or not. And anyway, fast forward, it wasn't until after I was ordained and realized that there were so many Orthodox women who were doing amazing, fantastic work, but they were doing it by themselves. It was lonely. They weren't doing it with support. And so the day after I was ordained, I announced the opening of Maharat because I wanted there to be a credentialed communal pathway to give all women the opportunity to be leaders. And so I think it was always about bringing this opportunity to the community, to others, to women, because we all deserve to be here. And this is, my community, my home, as much as anybody else's.
I admire the way you both talk about the love you have for the community and the women and others that you work with and for. You can't make the kinds of change that you are each doing if you do not have the love for the community, and the community knows that. They will feel it. And I think, for anyone in the room that is not part of the Orthodox community, it's easy to say, Orthodox women are agreeing to these kinds of marriages, what do they expect if they're going to get stuck? And I've never heard a divorce lawyer say, I love my job and I love the kind of work I do, but you see the mess and you love it. And you too, you've heard a lot of no's, and you've seen women hear a lot of no's, and you're still loving the community and loving the women and respecting sometimes even the people saying no while you're pushing for the yes, right? And so I think that's a really important lesson when you want to create change in a community. A, are you a part of it? B, do you get it? C, who are you benefiting by the change that you're trying to create? And do they know that you love them? And that's a really, I've learned that from you both times that I first met you, and I have carried that. And I admit that it's not always easy for me to love all the places that I come from. So thank you for being my teacher in that. Okay, so a lot of SRE is about being practical, right? What can we do next? And so having this session, it is important for us to ask, what supports do you each need, you yourselves or the people that you are representing here, right? The women and the other community members that you are representing by being here. What supports do you need from outside of the Orthodox community and from inside of the community to continue advancing the work that you do?
I also just want to, Gila, just underscore something you said. I get the question very often when I'm speaking in groups, especially when I'm speaking in front of a community that does not associate with the Orthodox community in any way. And the question is always, why stay? And why not go to a different rabbinical school if this was important to you? And I always answer, like, this is my community. But I remember one time I was in LA speaking at a ladies' breakfast, and it was very fancy, and I was speaking with Mayim Bialik, and we're enjoying each other's company and speaking about women's empowerment, etc. And I just remember this woman putting up her hand, and she was saying, but it's so archaic, and the Torah is so terrible, and the values that are held within are awful. And I felt so sad at that moment, and felt so overwhelmed almost that it was so obvious to me. I felt like I didn't even have the language to defend something that was just so part of my soul and my being. And of course, that's not to say that I'm not critical of my own community. And I think that's what I want to just start by saying. What we need is it is okay to be critical. I am angry a lot of the time, and frustrated, and still choose to push and stay. But when we hear that kind of critique or criticism from outside of the Orthodox community, it really hurts, and it's hard to say, no, we're actually looking for the same things. We're trying to work in the same field of creating more equity and more respect and more opportunities for women to serve. We're trying to think about how to create a power balance and a system of checks and balances, so that there are safer communities and abuse doesn't happen. And so I would say, open curiosity, as Ariella was saying. If there's curiosity about why people are still part of the Orthodox community, or why we stay where we are, curiosity is wonderful, and I'm always happy to engage and answer. But open critique, especially in public, is difficult. I think that there also needs to be a recognition of what we said at the beginning, that the Orthodox community is so diverse, and that we each sector of our community, I think, may operate and need something different. That is true, I think, across every denomination, but it seems within the Orthodox community that the spectrum from right to left is very, very broad. So much so that when I think about who my colleagues and comrades are, is it more to the right of me or more to the left of me? And I think that's an interesting question to think about. I think that another thing that I want to say is that I find myself very squeezed in this tiny little narrow space. When I started Maharat, there was certainly a lot of pushback and vitriol coming from the Orthodox community, and it was really hard to make inroads and get any support from those within the Orthodox community. And when I turned outside of the Orthodox community, the reaction was, we don't support Orthodox community, we don't support, Orthodox can take care of themselves, and for X, Y, and Z reasons, some of them we've spoken about already, we cannot support this. And it took a long time for me to put facts on the ground and create some credibility, where I could sort of prove to outside of the Orthodox community that we were worthwhile supporting. And of course, one-on-one conversations, members of the Orthodox community, of course, have come on board as well. But that attitude of the Orthodox can take care of the Orthodox was really hard for me, when that was where the least support was coming from. I have a whole long list, but I'm going to actually pause and let Keshet continue.
I'm going to echo much of what Rabbi Sarah just shared, in that I think that sometimes change-making or conversations around abuse outside of the Orthodox community, about the Orthodox community, can take on a sort of rescue vibe, right? All those poor ladies stuck in these terrible communities that are so old-fashioned, let's go in. And I don't understand why they're not leaving, but if they're gonna stubbornly insist upon doing that, then, I guess we better go help them. And I think the reason it's come up so much in this conversation is that to create change, you have to see clearly. You have to be able to understand your community, not with a sort of rose-colored glasses. You have to be able to see it for what it is. And I think it is impossible to create meaningful change in a community that you don't respect. And that's something that I've had to push myself on. I remember one situation where I was working on a case in a particular segment of the Hasidic community, and it was not going well, and I was working with a lot of people I did not enjoy working with. And I remember driving home that day and thinking, maybe this just really is a community where everyone's kind of a jerk, and maybe that's just the culture of this particular segment of the community. And then as I was driving home, I drove on a nail and got a flat tire. And fun fact, AAA will tow you unless you have a spare tire. But Orthodox AAA, which exists in New Jersey, will not. And so I called sort of the community AAA service, and this van pulls up, and all these guys from the same Hasidic community of this case I was working on pile out of the van, and they lift up my minivan, and they lend me a tire, didn't charge me, send me on my way. And I really felt like it was like a message from God that, oh, right, people are people. And everywhere you go, in every segment of the community, you're gonna find really great people, and you're gonna find some pretty terrible ones. And I think when it comes to abuse in particular, we all like to think that it happens mostly somewhere else. Modern Orthodox people always tell me, like, wow, you must be so busy in the ultra-Orthodox community. And then ultra-Orthodox people are like, oh, those modern people must be keeping you busy with all their secular values. And we all think it happens somewhere else, and it doesn't. One of my kids has a teddy bear that you can dress up in different outfits, like a bunny or a princess, And sometimes I think that's really what abuse is. It wears different clothing, it shows up differently, it looks differently depending on where it is, but it's the same thing at core, and we all deal with it. And so I think just having that sense of commonality, that sense of this is how abuse shows up in this particular community, and this is the language that it uses, and the clothing that it wears, and the form that it takes. But we're not fundamentally better or different than those people over there. We're all dealing with the same things, and the goal is in every segment of the community to build infrastructure that can respond to those problems that are unfortunately so universal and so hard to really meaningfully address.
What I'm loving about what you're both saying is that to advance safety, respect, and equity in the work you do, you need safety, respect, and equity from other people too. The Jews that you work with, the Orthodox Jews that you work with, the non-Orthodox Jews that you work with, you also need resources. Hint, hint. You also need the resources, but you need the very thing that you are trying to advance, and you can't do it without that, right? So I'm sitting with that. I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. I would love to open the floor for questions or comments. Are you good with comments? I know some speakers don't like comments. Any questions that people have? Sarah.
Uh-oh. Worried.
So I want to bring Shoshana Keats-Jaskol into this room, the founder of Chochma Nashim, who said to me yesterday in a larger group, who said, people think that we are building the patriarchy because we are Orthodox women, and nobody knows what to say to us. They see us as complicit. And I want to ask all three of you, what is it that people outside of the Orthodox community should be doing and saying when they see strong, powerful women who are working to advance safety and equity in the Orthodox Jewish community? Instead of saying, come on, ladies, come on, girls, you're building the patriarchy brick by brick. What can we train people outside of the Orthodox community to say in response to the incredible work that you're doing? Instead of continuing to undermine it, how can we educate other people to appreciate it and to replicate it in many instances in their communities?
I know we can definitely share what not to say. Yes, thank you. I mean, I'll say that at the first SRE big convening in New York, I spent an hour presenting the research on the experiences of survivors and the discourse with my co-author of the report. And two people came over to me at that convening, and one said, "Why do you still cover your hair?" And the other one said, "You went to Beis Yaakov, a very Orthodox girls' high school. How did you learn the language to say the things you just said?" And so that was like a stab, right, that I'm here doing this work. And we have come a long way, baby. We are doing this kind of panel now. And so doing these things, attending, being in this room, like thank you for being in this room and choosing this session. You could have gone to any session. So that's just me, but I want to let you both speak.
First of all, I thank you, Sarah. I wanted to say that in preparation for this, I actually spoke to several of you here and other women. I did speak to Shoshana as well, and so thank you for bringing her voice in. And I think she wanted to share that, so I appreciate it. I think that, let me gather my thoughts here. I think that the recognition that my students and leaders out in the community are going through are similar to what we're all experiencing. Here's a quick anecdote. I had the pleasure of traveling with the first 4 female rabbis from across the denominations, with Rabbi Sandy Sasso from the Reconstruction Movement and Sally Prezan from the Reform Movement and Amy Alberg from the Conservative Movement. And we went with mostly other Reform rabbis, traveling the footsteps of Regina Jonas, of Rabbiner Regina Jonas, who's the first woman who was ordained in Germany. And nobody had ever sort of given her the acknowledgement that she was due. And so we started off in Berlin, and then we went to Theresienstadt, where she was, and then we went to Prague, and we had like sort of set up a plaque in Theresienstadt in her honor. So on Shabbat, we're sitting around on Friday night dinner, and the 50 women or so are, by that time it had been such a serious trip, everybody was ready to laugh. And so the prompt was that everybody went around and said, tell the stories of what you experienced in those early years when you were trying to break new ground and become the full leaders that you were. And the stories were sad and hilarious. Everybody was on the floor talking about the male rabbi, the male teachers who asked them why they're in rabbinical school and not getting married, and the ones that would pick on them with there's a translation of Rambam, a Maimonidean book by Professor Penis, and so how they would use that word purposely to the women and make them read the title, and just all these awful microaggressions and not macroaggressions and abusive ways that these men and community was dealing with the women, and they were laughing because it had been many years, and it came to my turn, and they said, "Okay, tell me your funny story." And I looked at them and I said, "I'm still in it," and I think so many of you are. I'm not ready to laugh yet. It's all painful, and the abuse and the arrows that are thrown at us are difficult, and so I think what we need is a recognition that. The path that we're carving and traversing is one that has been traveled already, and I really try and appreciate and learn from those who have already done this, and I'm so grateful for those who made it possible for me, and to recognize that this is a part of that trajectory and a part of that natural evolution of what is next.
I would say also, I think that for people who are not part of a religious community or don't have a religious practice, you can see all the negatives, and certainly in roles like ours, those can be very, very clear, but you can also miss the positives. And so, for example, when it comes to domestic abuse, there are numerous academically published works and studies that look at survivors of domestic abuse who are connected to religious communities and how much better off they tend to be in the long term when they're plugged into a community. And so I think some of it is sort of translating that the reason it's worth staying and making these communities more responsive and safer for survivors, for example, is that religious communities, when done right, can be one of the best sources of long-term support in everything from financial to emotional to anything else to survivors. There's a tremendous amount of good here, and there is a reason that the women I work with fight so hard to not have to go somewhere else and don't even want to think about going somewhere else. And I think that's not always obvious on the outside. And I also really believe that, especially when it comes to engaging outside the Orthodox community, one of the reasons it's been important to me to be part of cohorts is that I think that presence alone does something. When you know real life people who are from a community, you can't look at that community the same way ever again. And so I think it's been important to me in my career not to only stay in my network of people who are just like me, but to really seek out networks that are out of my typical comfort zone, because there's a power in just knowing one Orthodox woman. And that alone creates nuance in a way that 1,000 words or 1,000 articles can't quite do.
Thank you. I want to add one other thing that I was sort of hesitating to say. When I came to the first SRE convening, I was surprised to see that there was no kosher food, and there was very few of us in the room. You could see who was Orthodox because there was, this tiny little group of us who were trying to cut away the plastic.
We laughed about this last night when we were eating dinner. I go, remember the plastic?
And, sort of like the layers and layers of foil, and you have to not cut your finger on the hard foil that
While
is
someone
one
was
of the,
speaking.
Right, and you're trying not to make a noise, and I hadn't been in a space like that in a while. Not that I'm not at non-Orthodox spaces, but it had been a while since I had. I was so part and separate from the room. And I think that if we want the fullest of the community to be represented, even though there are those here, and I think in general, who feel traumatized by our tradition and our Torah, I really appreciate SRE trying to, and I think the community at large, trying to balance that and have sort of equal opportunity for us to eat together at a table, number one, and number two, really making a concerted effort to invite those who wouldn't obviously arrive and come in. And I would say also this is another difference. I think there's always been an attempt to, or a sense that our tradition is important, and I think from the beginning there was Torah that was part of the value, and if you look at the values, our tradition and texts are part of the language that we speak. And I would say that I want to be able to center that Torah experience in a way that will make it more engaging and easier for women and men across the Orthodox spaces to access. And so I've appreciated the Divrei Torah and the learning, and I always think in terms of Torah, and even as I was thinking, I was wondering, should I give my Devar Torah that I have in my head, shouldn't I? Who's going to be there? Who's going to appreciate it? Who's not going to appreciate it? And I guess being able to sort of openly accept that the lens through which many of us do our work is based on our values and our tradition, and being able to bring that into modernity in our language, I think is important.
I just have to give a shout out to Ilana, because when she came on to SRE, we were going to have an in-person small retreat with some members, And she was like, it's going to be kosher. That's it. I don't care if you're the only one that is keeping 100% kosher here. Like, it's going to be kosher. And I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to say anything. And that has been the way. And when there was a question of a conference on Shabbat, which obviously I wouldn't have been able to attend or speak at, it was, well, obviously we're not going to do that. And so that's another way that you can support when you are engaging with Orthodox people, to not ask questions about where they can make the loophole over their practices, or just respect that those are their practices. Erica Brown has a really wonderful, tough piece on kashrut at conferences, which I say I hesitated to share with SRE. I'll share it to you tonight, but I did not share that yet, because it's really like, I teach all these non-Orthodox people, and then you invite me to your dinner and I cannot eat. And so she writes really well about this particular issue. We can talk about this all day. Other questions from the room, or comments, or observations?
We've got a mic.
Ariella has.
Can come to you.
I want to just apologize to all of you, because I will admit that at first seeing this on the agenda, it was a little bit triggering for many of the reasons that you guys actually named. To have my community that I associate with, the Orthodox community, being put, named as something that needed extra attention and focus at the SRE conference, but I should have known better than to doubt Gila. So my apologies. But I think, in addition to all of what you're all adding, I think so much of what I'm seeing from the back of the room here, which, being my first SRE conference, watching the importance of the work that everyone is doing across the Jewish community, with so much experimentation necessary, room to fail, to succeed, to try. There's a little bit less latitude for learning in the Orthodox community, and the ability to be an Orthodox member of the community and go out to other parts of the Jewish community and glean is so incredibly valuable. So the idea of having this session, Dafka, intentionally here, where it's carving out a little container of saying the work might look different, but it's necessary for it to happen part and parcel. And progress happens faster when we can be invited to the tables where work is happening at a little bit more rapid pace, because we can come into that room, come into that space, and thank you for the word language that you started with, Gila, translate into our Orthodox spaces. No question, just comment and apology.
Thank you. Who else has a question or comment?
Questions, comments? Got the mic? Maybe? Yes. I'm feeling it.
Hi. It's more of a reflection on the earlier part of your commentary around the importance of language, and just want to share one of the things that I think about a lot in the field of Jewish education is the implication of the choices Orthodox members of the community make around language, aka many women are teachers of Jewish life, are functioning in the same role as men who come into educational spheres with the title of rabbi, and don't have the same financial packages and benefits because of parsonage, because of other things like that. And I think part of our advancing this community is recognizing that some should and will choose to go the Rabbah route or the Maharat route or whatever it is, but there are others who are playing a really critical role in educating our children in the same exact way as a man in the same institution, but because they are not opting to take what is a big stand in Orthodoxy, there is inequity, and I think we need to recognize that that's a piece of the work that we need to figure out for, especially in the universe of an educator crisis, in our day schools. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to respond to say that we were literally just having this conversation over lunch, which is to say that Maharat recognizes that there's so much work to do across the board. And we're always going to, prioritize and focus on our core ordination program, but we've also launched something called our Center for Lived Torah, which is our platform from which we're bringing out our Torah and our secret source, so to speak, our values and education out to the community. And we're going to make available the opportunity to learn with other like-minded people in different spheres, be it educators, be it the Chabad community, be it Rebbitzins who want to access higher learning. Because Gemara and Talmud is the language of authority, and while I can't solve all issues for Orthodox women, we can't make them feel a little bit more empowered by giving them some language to feel like they have the resources to speak and demand that they belong in those spaces. Stay tuned.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? If not, we are a little bit over time, which I think is okay. And there is a short break before the next program. Oh, there is one last question here. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Barron. I'm Orthodox, but the organization that I run is non-denominational. And I find myself constantly in this space where I'm traversing, forget about my personal beliefs, because I'm the founder of the organization, so I specifically set the mission. But I'm constantly finding myself traversing these ideas of the assumptions that people make about me and the assumptions that people make about my organization. And I'm constantly having to explain myself to people all across the spectrum. So, Rabba Sarah and Keshet, I know both of you very well, but I'm just curious, Gila, I don't know you yet, and I'm looking forward to meeting you.
Likewise.
I'm just curious, I don't think I've ever posed this kind of question. How would you suggest, and you're not going to be able to share, tell me this on one foot, but I'm open to thoughts, suggestions on how to present myself, present my organization. Coming to spaces like this is amazing and beautiful because it reflects exactly the work that we do. Yesterday, I was at the Mishpacha nonprofit conference. Now, for those of you who don't, maybe some of you do, yes?
Explain.
Okay. So, Mishpacha is a very right-wing magazine that caters to the very right side of the community.
Religiously right.
Correct, religiously right. They do not show pictures of women in any of their publications.
So even in an advertisement for a woman's clothes,
Correct.
they will not
Correct.
have a picture of a woman.
Correct. And so
Or the clothes.
So my head is spinning. I feel much more comfortable here than I did there. But these are my comments and my questions.
So thank you for that. I will share research that I just presented in January on Orthodox women's leadership, which was the pain that Orthodox women feel having to leave their Orthodox community to work in better opportunities or places where they can be their almost full selves outside of the Orthodox world, but they're seen as this unicorn, that they're this rare kind of species. So find the places where you can be your full self, and I hope that you feel that way here. And thank you to SRE for making the opportunities where I think we can start showing up and say that, right? Kesha, you talked about representation. You are one of many, although you are super unique and what you're doing is super unique, but you are one of many. I am one of many. I am not, right? So I think that's another place of how you're representing yourself and your communities. Anything you two want to add before we wrap up to this? This is a real live question that was very strong in the research.
It's hard for me to answer this because I've known Amy for so long. And I would just say, I think you know the answer, which is you're going to be your most authentic self. And through that, I think people will hear and listen because you care so much about the topic, and so you're going to be able to speak the language to the right and the left, depending on the space that you're in. Just keep doing the amazing work. If you don't know what Amy does, go talk to her. It's really awesome.
Thank you both so much for the learnings, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Gila.
Thank you so much, Gila, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.